Hey everyone, today we're going to go over how to set up and deploy Toshi to your own web server. Toshi is a Bitcoin implementation written in Ruby by Coinbase.com. Toshi is based on the Bitcoin Ruby gem, which can be found here. Toshi was built in response to Coinbase's need for scalable Bitcoin infrastructure. Bitcoin Core right now is the reference implementation for the Bitcoin protocol. And it does a great job at powering the Bitcoin network, running Bitcoin nodes, managing wallets. However, it has limitations when it comes to scalability, especially when it's powering the back end for online wallets like Coinbase. So Coinbase decided that they would create a new Bitcoin implementation written in Ruby and backed by PostgreSQL, which is very heavily used in the web application world, and Redis. And what Toshi does is it takes all the blockchain data and it stores it in a much larger, much more quote-unquote queryable database that allows for much richer insights and much more in-depth exploration of the blockchain. Now, there's a list on their GitHub page of all the things you can do, or some of the things you can do with Toshi that you can't do with Bitcoin Core. For example, finding all the transactions for a given address, querying data from the blockchain over certain periods of time, things like this. That would be very useful for running a block explorer or something like that. Now, one of the downsides to Toshi is that its database is about 10 times bigger than that of the Bitcoin Core implementation, specifically because it's built for this queryability. So by the end of this session, hopefully, we'll be able to run Toshi, which has a web front end that looks like this, and a JSON API that returns data, similar to this, like blockchain.info. We're going to have something like this running from our own web server on AWS. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, to get the most out of this, it would help to have some experience with SQL and AWS and the command line. But I'll try to keep things as basic and explain things as much as possible to make this easy for everyone. And we're also going to be using Docker. So if you're new to Docker, don't worry. I'll try to explain as much as I can. So I'm here in my AWS console. Now, if you don't have an AWS account, you're going to have to sign up for one. So I thought about using DigitalOcean, but when I went to DigitalOcean, I realized that you can't really get low memory instances with a lot of disk space. If you get a lot of disk space, you have to get a lot of memory, and I didn't feel like paying for all that. So we're going to start from scratch here and walk through it step by step. So at my console, I'm going to click Launch Instance to set up a new instance. All right, now I like to use Ubuntu because I'm familiar with it and comfortable with it. So I'm going to select Ubuntu, and I suggest you do too, unless you really are familiar with something else. Okay, now to choose the instance we want. Now, for this example, I'm going to stick with a T2 medium instance. What you choose here is really up to you. The more powerful you choose, the more expensive it's going to be. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to stick to something that works. Now, you'll notice that the instance storage column says EBS only. So after we complete this step, or the next few steps, we're going to add storage space because we're going to need about 300 gigabytes to store the Toshi database. So I'm going to take this choice here and click Configure Instance Details at the bottom. Okay, now here I like to change the auto-assign public IP to enable, and everything else is pretty much okay when it comes to the defaults. Now, if you're doing this for a web application or something very security sensitive, that's a whole nother level, and this isn't going to cover any of that. This is just for ease of use and getting it up and running. Now, so this looks good, so I'll click Review and Launch at the bottom. Oh, sorry, no, I want to click Add Storage. Next, Add Storage. Okay, so I'm gonna be safe and add about 350 gigabytes of storage here. I entered it here in this fourth column. Okay, so I'm going to click Review. Actually, so at the top here, I'm going to click Configure Security Group. Okay, so I'm going to create a new security group, and I'm going to name it Toshi Group. Description: security group for Toshi instance. Okay, now we want SSH so we can access the server. I'm just going to keep it anywhere because it doesn't really matter right now. If you want to be safe, you can change this source to only your IP. And we need to add a rule though. Toshi, by default, is accessible on port 5000. So to access our web server, we want to access Toshi on port 5000. So we're going to do a custom TCP rule and add the port range 5000. So just for port 5000 from anywhere. Change the source to anywhere. So this looks good. So now we'll review and launch. So we see some warnings. Yeah, they're all okay. Maybe security Toshi group is open to the world. I don't really care. Okay. Memory, storage. Okay, boom. Launch. All right. So let's create a new key pair. Call it Toshi key. Okay, now this is going to download. When you click download, it's going to download a .pem file, and you're going to have to use this PEM file to SSH into your server. So I'll do that. Okay, so it just downloaded, and I'll launch my instance. Okay, great. Now, I'm going to click View Instances, go to my dashboard, okay, now it's running. Nope. Let's see. One running instance. It was hidden from me. Okay, so our instance is running, and we'll click connect. So you see this command here: SSH I Toshi key.pem Ubuntu at the IP. So remember this IP. This is your server's public IP. So to SSH into the server, I'm going to open my console, and I'm going to type SSH I. Now this is in downloads, Toshi key.pem, and copy this. Let's wait for that to SSH in. Turn off transparency there. Well, you know what? I think I may have not. Oh, you see here, we didn't actually, although we created our security group, we didn't assign it to this instance. Amazon's interface for this is a little bit confusing, and sometimes it gets me. So we're going to change our security group here by right-clicking, instance settings, networking, change security groups. Okay, we want to change it to Toshi group. Okay, assign. Okay, stop that. Try again. There we go. Yes. Oh. Forgot. We need to change the permissions of our PEM file. I need to chmod 400. There we go. There, we're in. Okay, so we're going to start from where we left off last time. We have our AWS server up and running. So now we're going to create a user for our Toshi project. So I'm going to run the command sudo add user Toshi. Our user is going to be called Toshi. Okay. Password. Okay. Yes. Okay. Then I'm gonna add him to this sudoers group, so he has the power. All right. Now I'm gonna change the user to Toshi. So right now our user is Ubuntu. Now our user is gonna be Toshi. Watch the left side after I enter my password. Boom. Okay. We're our Toshi user. All right. So now that we're all set up with our users, we're going to install Docker. Now Docker makes it easy for us to run all of the services that Toshi needs to operate, and those are Postgres, Redis, and its own service, its own web server, and its own process. So to install Docker, we're going to run a command, a curl command that downloads a script from their website and just runs it and sets everything up for us. It installs all of the packages that we need. So it's this command here, and I'll just give you a second to look at it. And I'm going to hit enter. Put my password. Okay, you can see here it's starting to update all of the packages. It's installing Git. It's installing Docker. So now we have Docker. Let's see. There. Boom. All right. So the other thing we need is the Toshi code. So the Toshi code is on GitHub, right here. And so we're going to clone it. So we're going to use the HTTPS link, copy it from GitHub, and run git clone, and paste it in there. So now we have Toshi. So we're going to move into that directory, and we can see all the files that are included in Toshi. Now, one that I think is good to point out is the Docker file. Okay, this is what is going to be used to build the Toshi Docker image. And what that includes is all of the packages that Toshi needs to run on its own. This Docker file doesn't include Postgres or Redis. We install those separately and tell Toshi where to find them. But this does include all of the gems that Toshi needs to run, and it's pulling from the base image located on quay.io/coinbase/rails latest. And so that's installing Ruby, Ruby and Ubuntu and everything else it needs. So the Docker file is just kind of a definition of all the things that happen to build the Toshi Docker image. And a Docker image is what's used to create a Docker container. Okay, so we'll quit the Docker file. Okay. And now we're going to build the image. So to do that, we're going to run sudo docker build t Coinbase Toshi. That's what it's going to be called. Dot. Remember the dot at the end. That's important. Okay, so you can see here it's pretty much just running all those commands in that Docker file, pulling the base image and installing all of the other things we specified, like bundler and the gems. So this will take a little bit of time. It's installing all the versions and all the dependent layers. And if you want to learn more about Docker, there's a lot to learn. I recommend going to docker.io. It's a very powerful tool, and I'm still learning more and more about it, and the more I use it, the more I like it. So I definitely recommend checking it out. So right now we're building the Toshi, the image that we're going to use for Toshi. We still have to build the Postgres and Redis images, which exist on something called Docker Hub. And Docker Hub is kind of like GitHub for Docker images. Okay, so what we'll do is, in one command, we'll build or just download the image for Postgres, name it, and then run it as a container. So a container is like a running image. And so we're going to build and run our Postgres container, build and run our Redis container, and then we're going to run our Toshi container using this image that we're building right now. We have to wait to run the Toshi container because we need to tell it where to find Postgres and Redis, because it needs Postgres and Redis to run. So we have to run Postgres and Redis first and then run Toshi. Right now we're just building Toshi, not running it. Okay, so we're getting an error here, error getting container, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this happened to me before, and I don't think it's anything to worry about. It still worked. So we'll just ignore that for now. All right, so next step is to run sudo docker run, and then we'll do the flag name, and we'll call it toshidb. And this container, or this image and container we're about to run, is going to hold the Postgres database that we're using. So what this is doing is it's running a Docker container with the name of toshidb as a daemon, as a background process, using Postgres. Now, we don't have an image, we don't have a Postgres image in our machine. So what Docker is going to do is say, oh, I don't see any Postgres image here. I'm going to go to Docker Hub, download it, and then run it as a container. So run is kind of like download and run. Download the image and then run it as a container, all in one command. So ToshiDB is our name that we choose. You can call it potato, banana, whatever you want. But Postgres is a standard name that you need to use because that's what Docker has the image named as. They have base images for very common libraries like Ruby, Postgres, and Redis, and things like that. So now we're going to do the same thing for Redis. So sudo docker run Toshi Redis, call that Redis. Okay. Oh, messed up something here. Docker run. Oops, got to pass the name flag. Name. Sudo docker run name Toshi Redis D. Okay. Great, perfect. So now we can see our running containers. Great. So using the sudo docker ps command, that'll show you all your running containers. And so you can see we have 2. And you see the image used. You can see when they were created, their statuses. You can see the ports they have that you can communicate with them on. And these are default for Redis and Postgres. And the names that we gave them. Now, if you don't specify a name, Docker will choose 2 random words to use as the name. Kind of like a Heroku app that it picks just from a random library and puts them together. So now we got those running. We need to get our Toshi container up and running. Now, to do that, we need to know some details about our Redis and our Postgres containers. And we need to know each one's IP address so we can tell the Toshi container where to find Redis and where to find Postgres. So to find the IP of each container, we can use another Docker utility that's very convenient called inspect. So sudo docker inspect Toshi DB gives us all this information about that container. Now, to make things easy on us, I know ahead of time the exact thing we're looking for. So I'm going to pipe that into a grep command, IP address. Okay, boom. That's our IP address for our Postgres container. And then we'll do the same thing for Redis. Okay, now that's our IP address for our Redis container. Great. So 3 and 4. Okay, so now that we have the IP addresses, we're good to go. Now let's make sure we remember those port numbers actually. PS. Okay, because I always forget those. So we have our IP addresses and our ports for each of our Redis and Postgres containers. So now we're going to run Toshi. Sudo docker run. Give it a name, Toshi main, like our main container. Run it as in the background. Now we're going to pass a flag P to it. And we're going to after P, we're going to write 5000, 5000. Now Toshi server runs on port 5000, but it runs on port 5000 inside of its container. So what this command does is it takes the port 5000 inside the Docker container and maps it to port 5000 on our host machine. Otherwise, I think it would have some random port assigned to it, which we could find, but it's just less convenient. So here we're telling the port 5000 of the container to map to port 5000 of our actual machine. And then we need to pass 3 environment variables. We need to pass the Redis URL, the database URL, and the Toshi environment production development flag. So our Redis URL has the form Redis://170, our Redis IP address dot 17 dot 0 dot that was 4, and the port is 6379, and then we have our database URL, and these are environment variables that Toshi needs. Postgres at, oops, forgot a colon, at 172.17.0.3, port 5432. Okay. And then we have a third environment variable called Toshi env equals production. Okay. And then we're going to run this command on the Coinbase Toshi image. Then we're going to run the shell command inside of this image, inside of this container, bundle exec rake db create db migrate. So this will run the migrations in our Postgres container, but from Toshi. And then foreman start, and that will start our web server. So if everything is good here, we should have this should create a Toshi container and have it start syncing the blockchain. So let's see. Okay, pulling repository, Coinbase Toshi. So it's building something. Let's wait for it to finish. Boom. Okay. So it looks like it downloaded even newer image for Coinbase Toshi. And it may have just updated while we were doing this. I'm not sure. And so it returned this ID of the container. So we'll clear this, and to see if it's actually running, run sudo docker ps. Boom. So now we see our Coinbase Toshi container here, and we see that the port is mapped from the container to our host properly as we want. Now to really make sure that Toshi is working, we're using another Docker utility called logs. Pass it the F flag, kind of like tail F. And we'll call that command on Toshi main. And we see here that it looks like it's syncing something with blockchain data. So it looks like it's working to me. To really know, we can go check out our web interface and see if it shows what we want it to show. All right. Now, remember we had that IP address for our instance, that public IP. And that was 54.88. So if we go to that IP address, port 5000, woohoo! We have our own instance of Toshi up and running. And we can see that it's syncing all these blocks. Started at block 0. And it's syncing really fast right now because all these blocks are pretty small. But this actually could take a few weeks to sync the whole blockchain because the blocks get much bigger very quickly. You can see these blocks are from 2009, so just past the Genesis block. And so that's it. We've successfully deployed and got Toshi up and running. In the next screencast, we'll talk about how to actually query the database and find some interesting things in the blockchain.